So today I have the pleasure of introducing a person whose name you see often in the press. He has so many talents that they are too numerous to describe really in an introduction. I think it's interesting to note that he was elected to the Maine legislature at age 25. So I won't make you put up a show of hands as to who's 25 in this room. But imagine being elected to the legislature in New York at age 25, and by age 29, he was the majority leader. So you can tell about Jim Tierney that he was a person at an early age who cared deeply about Maine and wanted to make a difference. He's got an interesting life story that he will tell you. He served as Attorney General of Maine from January 6, 1981 to January 6, 1991. Maine is interesting in that the Attorney General is elected by secret ballot of the legislature. Who does that? Only Maine, only in Maine. And I don't know, do we call you maniacs or what do we call you? Um, he's got just a varied professional career, which is all great. Attorneys general hire him sometime to do special investigations. He did one on public corruption that I remember well. He's a consultant to attorneys general. He set up a state attorney general training institute at Columbia. He now teaches at Harvard. One of my favorites was if you ever, or your family members ever watch Court TV. I loved it, Jim, when you said, as a commentator, we're now going to approach the bench. And you knew something momentous, supposedly, was supposed to happen. Sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. There's no one better to really talk about the program topic, an activist state attorney general, role as innovator, policymaker, and change agent. Jim Tierney loves students. He cares deeply about making the world a better place. And he's a person who has and will continue to make a huge difference. I did go back and after I found out there's an electrician named Jim Tierney and I think a music maker and a whole host of other people named Jim Tierney or James Tierney, I did find something from I think it was one of your, the headline, I won't read you the headline, but it was The Unmasking of Maine and Beyond, where he did a panel discussion talking about immigration. It was a Portland audience. I couldn't find the date, but I thought it was interesting. Former Maine Attorney General James Tierney told the Portland audience Tuesday evening that the state's economy will depend on its ability to attract and accommodate newcomers from foreign countries. Maine must reject, quote, the politics of fear and embrace programs that create opportunities for immigrants. I imagine this was in the last year or two. But that has always been the Jim Tierney that I know reaction to current issues and problems. So, Jim, you're next.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you. I'm probably going to sound like I'm repeating your president and Marcus. I was very touched. Marcus, I've never heard you speak before. Marcus is by far of all the graduates of John Jay the best dresser. I mean, there's just no question. He outdoes himself every time, makes the rest of us feel a little doubty. Thank you for letting me come. This is a school that has an extraordinary mission. And it's one that's known certainly all across the United States and around the world. And so I jumped at the chance when Lynn asked me to come. Lynn is an old friend. She's made the world better, as we all have tried to do as we've gone through our times. And so for all of you here on a Friday morning and all of you who will be watching diligently because we're taping this morning, let me try to say a few words about activist attorneys general. What does that mean? And how do attorneys general set policy? The real experts on how attorneys general deal with immigrants are going to be here on the next panel. Our representatives from the New York AG's office are true national leaders on this. Most of you are from New York and will be living in New York and have personal issues that arise from your time here in New York, and so they're the real experts, not me. But hopefully I can set sort of a framework, a national framework, if you will. And but I was troubled with it. I just turned 70 years old, and so my question is, for many of you who are my grandchildren's age, what is it exactly I can teach you? I come from a state which is the oldest state in the country, the whitest state in the country. And I suppose one thing I can teach you is, of what happens to a state when it doesn't have people of color, when it doesn't have the fresh results of immigration. Lynne's correct. I've given a number of speeches in Maine, one at Bates College in particular, if you're interested. But it shows what happens if you just don't have this whole energy level that comes from the rest of the country. 94%, this is an astounding figure, 94% of the growth in the United States, people getting are from families of color, not from white people like me. So if this country is to grow and to expand and to become diverse and to have the energy that it's always had, it's not going to come from people who look like me or sound like me. It's going to come from more like people who look like you and who look like this amazing city where I spend so much of my time. So anyway, I was troubled about what I could say, and so earlier this week, I go to Washington, D.C. a lot. We're having a meeting there on consumer protection. I got there a little early, and I did something I've never done before. I went to Arlington National Cemetery. Most of you probably know or have read that Arlington National Cemetery is our cemetery which is not exclusively but primarily dedicated to veterans and people who've either died in the service or served for long periods and keeping us safe in our armed forces. So I walked around. It was a nice day. This was Tuesday. And this amazing place. I learned a lot. I learned that there are 400,000 graves in Arlington National Cemetery. Veterans of every war, 600 acres of land. And I'd never been there. So I trudge up this hill, and I start to see the gravestones on the side, and I must admit I noticed a significant number of them, at least where I was walking, were mostly men, but men and women who were my age. They were people born the same time I was. And yet they'd either been killed in the war or died for some reason and were buried, and that's kind of a sobering way to start your day. There were over 4 million visitors go to Arlington National Cemetery, and I saw many of them, people of all colors. I saw Muslims and Jews and Catholics. You could tell by on the gravestones. So it was a microcosm, if you will, of our country. And so I was naturally drawn to the graves of President Kennedy. John Kennedy is buried there, the President of the United States, assassinated over 50 years ago, and his brother Robert, who was assassinated 49 years ago this month. And after spending a few moments there in tribute to them, I saw there was a little path that went around to the right. It looked a little unusual, so I went around the corner, and there were plenty of gravestones around, but right in front of them was a gravestone of somebody I knew. I was kind of surprised. His name was Allen Lowenstein, and he'd been a one-term congressman is all. He was a private, a PFC in the Army, which is, I assume, how he ended up being buried in Arlington. But he was a great fighter for civil rights, and he fought to stop the Vietnam War, and he fought racism, and he'd been active in the South in the 60s. People my age have heard of him, and I was touched by seeing his gravestone so close to the Kennedys. He died 37 years ago. So I went home and did some research, and I watched some old TV interviews of Al Lowenstein. And he said something which ended up being the key to my remarks to all of you today. He says, integrity is the basis of democracy. You think about nothing else today, take Al's words with you. Integrity is the basis of democracy. I said, well, I think I know what integrity means, so I look it up in the dictionary. And there are actually two distinct meanings. Integrity means being honest and true. But integrity also means to be integrated. It also means to take disparate parts and put them together. Integration, right? Integrity, same basis, the same word. And I hadn't had that quite perspective. I said, wow, there's democracy for you. Honest and true, and integration, integrated into a common thought and theme. And this is what Marcus was talking about in his remarks. Because we're all so different. We have all these huge problems. So how can democracy solve them? What is it that draws us together? And I would say to you, those of you who are interested in being lawyers or interested in the world of attorneys general, that it's our Constitution and our laws that bring us together. And believe me, there's plenty of room to disagree within that framework, right? But it works. It actually works. Worked in my life. My story is not at all unusual. I'm not telling it because there's some sort of uniqueness about it. But it's America's story, like Marcus's family's story. My mother came from a terribly abusive home in Brooklyn, where she was born. When my grandfather, James, of course, I was named for him, dropped dead in the street. He's an alcoholic. It provided enough benefits from New York State government that she could be taken out of the orphanage where she was placed, even though her parents were alive. Her family was so abusive. And so she got out of the state-run home, and she began to live her life. But they didn't have the value of education that everyone in this room did, so when she was 14 years old, she dropped out of high school. My father's an immigrant. He showed up. His mother and my Uncle Willie were stopped at Ellis Island. They sent him in alone, and he had a note, a 10-pound note, which he'd gotten when he left Ireland, and from selling a bicycle. And welcome to New York. He said, well, I've got this address I have to find over in Brooklyn. I've got to get over there. He's like 14, 15 years old. He spoke English. A lot of people come to this country don't have that benefit, but he's from Ireland. He spoke English. And the guy came up, he said, in a uniform. And he said, really, do you have any money? He said, yeah, I've got this money. So give me this money, I'll make sure you get there. So my dad gave him the money, and the guy took off, right? Welcome to America. So here he is. He's got no money. He's 14, 15 years old. He's standing down here on the west side, 23rd Street or so. That's where the boat came in. So he started to walk. What else are you going to do? And he asks directions, and he eventually finds his way over to Brooklyn, where some cousin he'd never met knocks on the door, puts him in the basement, gives him a piece of cheese, has him sleep on a blanket on the basement of the floor. Welcome to America. So what happens? They have a horrible time, my mother and father. This is not some sweetness and lightness marriage, but they did hard physical work their whole lives. They kept getting fired because they had opinions. Having opinions isn't necessarily the best way to promote job security. Maybe some of you have already learned that. Some of you already figured that out. They kept getting fired. My father suffered terrible depression. Obviously, why? When you look back, you can see their experiences. And we ended up being stuck in Maine for a variety of reasons not worth going into. Thank God we had government checks that would show up in our house when I was a kid. And maybe some of you have been in a situation, those first 2 weeks after the government come every month, those first 2 weeks after the government check comes in, they were good weeks. Second 2 weeks in the month, not so good. So you've had this feeling. But one thing we always had books, because we had libraries that were free, right? And we had schools that were paid for by taxpayers. And we had police officers that kept us safe. And we had court systems that worked. And so we kept going to school. We kept working at it. But we didn't do it alone. And some people, they were born on third base and they thought they hit a triple, right? That wasn't us. We just kept working at it. And so at the end of the day, my sister and my two brothers, we get together a lot. We all gone to college, government colleges like this one, supported by the taxpayers like this one. And we all have advanced degrees. We had a bunch of kids. They've all gone to college. And we've been very, very fortunate. So the system worked for us. The safety net worked for us. Are we rich? No, none of us are rich. Do we have enough money? Absolutely. Absolutely. We're fine. That's one of the things I could never figure out. I could never figure out why people just need to get more and more money. I really don't understand it. Your budget for your entire school, including what you pay and what the taxpayer stays for this school, is $100 million. Some billionaire yesterday bought a painting for $100 million. What's that all about? One guy. A painting in $100 million. Go back. He's not listening to Marcus, right? Helping the least. Always remember where you came from. This guy. What is this about? I've never understood that. So the safety net worked for me, and we always thought that we wanted to make it easier for people who could climb up the ladder behind us. But there are a lot of people in this country who don't believe in that. And either they didn't make it on their own, they just inherited it, or they made it on their own, and and they don't want to make it easier. They're threatened by people coming along behind. Right? Very large percentage. Almost it's decided whether a quarter to a third of the Latino vote in the United States last November voted for President Trump. There are people who have come along and then said, well, here we are, and we're not letting anybody else in. Because we must be special. We must be extra. I worked really hard to get where I am. Well, it's true. I worked hard. Marcus worked hard. Many of you have worked hard. But that doesn't mean you did it on your own. That doesn't mean you did it on your own. All those invisible people who paid taxes, people who didn't have children paid taxes to schools to help me go to school. That's what we do, right? If you fight to protect the environment, guess what? Nobody knows. If the air is clean, the water is clean, you go to a tap in New York City, it's one of the cleanest drinking waters of any city in America. You drink the water. You don't know that somebody had to work to make that happen. By definition, you don't know, right? The air is still clean, the water's clean, you're not sick. You just walk past a huge hospital. If you get sick, you'll be there in 10 minutes, right? This doesn't happen by accident. But there are those who are attempting to destroy the core premise of integration. The first time it was really articulated for the federal government with Franklin Roosevelt in the 30s. It was the first time the federal government established a relationship with individuals, things like Social Security. Now it's Medicare, Medicaid, health care. People want to break that. They want to say you're on your own. And I listen to some of those radio stations and TV stations sometimes, and I don't get it. Don't come close to get it. But it's the way it is. And their neighbors too. They seem to think that skin color doesn't matter, right? They seem to think that all technology is good. You know, I may be the last person in America who doesn't use Uber because I think every time I think about it, I know some taxi driver isn't getting a fare. It bothers me. So I don't use it. I know it's silly, but it's my own little personal protest, if you will. And there have been times when I haven't been able to get a cab. I want you to know, standing on the street. So it may not be the smartest thing I ever did, but it's a matter of my small little principle that technology doesn't always help people. So how does this come to attorneys general? Attorneys general are independent lawyers. They're in state government. There's nothing like it in the federal government. And they supervise 13,000 assistant attorneys general, several of them who are here today. And you've got a great one in New York. There's a great one in the District of Columbia, the bosses, if you will, of our next speakers. They all, but every day they get up to do things. And, you know, when they do things, they're not always doing things they agree with, because, you know, government makes mistakes just like the rest of us. When you make a mistake, that's when you need a lawyer. It's not like you wake up in the morning and say, oh, I gotta go. I'm really having a great day. Nothing's wrong. I'm going to go see my lawyer. No, that doesn't happen. You go to your lawyer when you got a problem, right? So state government's the same way. It makes mistakes, and so you need to have a lawyer to represent you, and the Office of Attorney General is there to defend you, take care of you, even if it's a mistake. So sometimes attorneys general are doing things that they'd rather not do, but we're lawyers, right? We've got a job to do. You have to help people. That's part of the job, to help the whole system work. But within that, you do develop a sense that comes from the Office of Attorney General saying, we really are here. They have deep in the DNA of the Office of Attorney General is what Marcus said, that we're here to help the least of us. It's very deep in the DNA, right down to the administrative assistants and the investigators. Somewhere in there is this sense we are here to do the right thing. We are not here to exploit. We are not here to take advantage of people. And that's pretty important. So it was pretty natural then, if that is deep in the DA of AG offices, that when the President of the United States signed an unconstitutional travel ban in January, that it was the attorneys general who said, whoa, wait a minute, we're going to go to court and try to stop that. And they did. And so it's not unusual when a system sort of functions here. And, you know, you can tell, and Lynne Ross and I both know all the people who've gone through the ranks of attorneys general. And so we now have 9 former attorneys general are in the United States Senate. 9 of them out of 100. That's a lot. And they carry with them this same sort of DNA principle that, wait a minute, right is right and wrong is wrong. And so now we have the President of the United States who is under investigation. He should be under investigation. And those former AGs in the Senate, both parties have said, yeah, we need to have an investigation. This has to be a fair one. We have to find out what happened. Now, he's not particularly happy about being investigated. If any of you, I've never been investigated, but if any of you have been, I imagine it's kind of an uncomfortable feeling. I can understand why it might ruin his trip to Saudi Arabia thinking about it. But I'd hate to see that happen. But the point is, there is an investigation. And my point to all of you is that this system works, right? That there is a structure to it, right? So it appears, I'm not sure, that the next head of the FBI is going to be the former Attorney General of Connecticut. So this process of being an Attorney General, what it means and how it gets carried out is vitally important. Now, the title here is to talk about immigrants. I'd like to broaden that, if you will, a little bit and talk about diversity. Because, I mean, once you start talking about immigrants, you start dividing people up. My father was an immigrant. My mother wasn't, right? My oldest two siblings are immigrants, but my younger brother and sister are not. I mean, you get all mixed up, right? If you try to make that line in a way which, by definition, is going to be arbitrary. So instead, I think we should talk about diversity. Now, if you want to know what AGs are doing about diversity, then I suggest you do some research. I mean, listen to this panel, listen to me, but mostly you're going to have to do some work. You're students. You have to figure that out. I run a website, StateAG.org. Go to it. And beneath it, you'll find a website I ran at Columbia Law School for 10 years, which has a lot of information there about what attorneys general do about diversity, what they do about criminal justice, what they do about labor law enforcement, what they do about basic constitutional rights that we all have. And research it and study it. There are videos and there are articles. Because you're students. If this was a different kind of crowd, I'd do it in a different way. But I'm anticipating that you're all going to be the lawyers or police officers, and I hope you are, or work in the criminal justice system in some way. So I think I want to end by coming back to Al Lowenstein. And that the line I want you to remember, that, you know, the connection between democracy and integrity is pretty core. But that's not what's on his gravestone. On his gravestone, which I was shocked to see, but it was a wonderful quotation. It's from Ralph Waldo Emerson. Emerson was a transcendentalist New England philosopher, 19th century. And the quotation is as follows. He said, if the single man, now today hopefully he'd write men and women, but if the single man plants himself indomitably on his instincts and there abides, this huge world will come around to him. Think about that. If a single person, just you, I'm not talking about your mothers, your sisters, your professors, not talking about Marcus or Lynne or me, I'm talking about just you, yourself. You formulate your instinct and you abide, you stick with it, then this whole huge world will come around to you. Thank you very much.
We've got just a little bit of time maybe for a question or two. Anybody have one? Now's your golden moment. Surely somebody has a question.
No, they're shy. Hi, Lourdes.
Finally. Hi. I had a question about at your time when you were AG of Maine, about how much you collaborated with other AGs around the country on different projects. In the current climate, we're doing a lot of work with other AG offices, and I was wondering if that was something new, or has that historically been the case?
Yes, AGs have always worked together. Two things make it easier. The first is the concentration of the American economy. It used to be, if a company did something wrong, the company was probably owned and operated by people who lived in Maine. Well, that doesn't exist anymore. We live in an entire world where our economy is completely integrated. And what happens at a pharmacy in, Lisbon Falls, Maine, where I live, and a pharmacy around the corner is going to be exactly the same, because they're large corporations, hedge fund, equity-owned operations. That's the way it works. I mean, your dentist, probably works for a company that's owned by a hedge fund. I mean, so the idea of thinking that you could do this by yourself doesn't make any sense. Plus, some issues that arise, such as privacy, internet privacy, are inherently multi-state in nature. So the technology allows attorneys general to work across state lines. It happens a lot. And there are a significant number of different cases that are going on at any given time. Email makes it possible, and one of my goals now in life is to actually, it's great to do things on Skype, but there's nothing like getting together in the same room. So one of my goals is to create channels of assistant attorneys general like yourself, Lourdes, who do the same kind of work to get together with your colleagues from California and Illinois and Iowa and North Carolina and Texas, wherever it happens to be. But yes, it's always been there. When Lynne was running NAAG, she would bring us together for congressional hearings. There was always congressional testimony from attorneys general in front of the U.S. Senate, and Lynne was in charge of making sure that happened, getting me out of Maine, making me go to Washington and testify, which I did on many occasions at her request. Yes, so I hope that's a little bit longer answer, but I took a few minutes rather than just saying yes to try to explain why and how it is that attorneys general, and your practice, whatever your law practice will be, will cross state lines. It just will, right? People move, right? Issues move. Problems that address them move. You buy a product, it wasn't made, down the street. You didn't buy it from a store that your uncle runs. That's not the way the world works anymore. And so it's by definition, no matter where you go, you're going to have to be able to understand that capital moves, people move, and so the law moves as well.
Role that has maybe caused you to question the integrity of not only yourself, but maybe the system? Is there one particular
Sure.
event?
Yeah, there is. We talk about democracy and being honest and true. The United States Supreme Court has launched itself and has for about 20 years now on a deeply, deeply misguided view that corporations are people. Corporations are not people. We're people. We live, we breathe, we love, we break up, we fall in love. We're people. Corporations don't do that. And so by allowing the legal fiction to accrue that corporations are people, it allowed them to have the same First Amendment rights that we all should have because we are people, right? The right to speak and public, give money to campaigns. So they said, well, corporations are people, so they should be able to give as much money as they want to any candidate. And so this results in a dramatic shift in how democracy is to be true and integrated, to use Al Lowenstein's terms. It's very difficult to be honest and true if you know that someone's going to come in with huge amounts of money and knock you out of office, and it's hard to bring people together when people with a lot of money are trying to break you apart. So this is a huge challenge to our core system. It's a result of very misguided Supreme Court decisions. All these decisions have been 5-4. We had hopes that was going to change. It doesn't look like it's going to for a while, but hopefully it will in your lifetime. But the idea that corporations are people has always been morally offensive. In addition to legally wrong, it's always been morally offensive to me. Corporations are things that lawyers dream up in order to do business. Fine, great, happy for them, but they're not people. And I think that has posed a huge ethical challenge. It also gets in the way of trying to stop advertisements of their lives, right? That people are saying you should buy this product or that product, and it's just not true. And it's just a way for them to make money. And they'll say, well, we're a corporation and we're just exercising free speech. No, you're not. You're a business that's trying to make money by telling falsehoods to people to get them to buy your product, a product that might hurt them. And they said, no. So that is a core and I think fundamental issue which transcends any particular issue such as voting rights or the environment or consumer protection or certainly dealing with these sorts of issues, immigration issues. I think it's pretty basic. Well, we have one more question here. There we go. Yeah.
Dominican Republic. Thank you. And it's easy to, one of my clients actually became an ambassador of France. He left the Dominican Republic, became the ambassador of France. So it's easy to get documented, but what would you say and how do you help undocumented, like what do you do with the undocumented individuals that have a concern with immigration?
Well, this is going to be the subject for our subsequent panels here from the New York AG's office, the people in the Civil Rights Division who do that, so I don't want to mislead it. There's certainly always been a significant amount of don't ask, don't tell. You have rights. You work. You should get the minimum wage. You should be job protections. You should work in a safe environment. You should be able to function regardless of your status. That would be my position. But that's not the position of the President of the United States. He has a lot of power, and so the law in this field is clearly unsettled. So it is complicated giving clear legal advice, we as lawyers, which we have to do.